Okay, hi, thank you for gathering today in this cold weather. Again, I'm Heather McLean, and I'm here with the Council of Canadians to do some moderating. We're going to start out now with each candidate will be given 5 minutes to state their party's position on pertinent topics, as well as introduce yourselves and why you're running, or anything that you consider important to this riding and why you're running. So you have 5 minutes to start with, and Jim will tell you when your 5 minutes is up. We'll start here. Is there an order you have in mind? Okay, so we're going to proceed down the line.
Well, thank you, Wendy, and good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for coming out and braving the chilly fall weather, even though it's really supposed to be summer still. My name is Terry Lake. I think I'll just hold that. I don't think it's going to go in there. My name is Terry Lake. I'm running for the Liberal Party of Canada, and many of you probably know me from my previous experience in the city of Kamloops as a councillor, as the mayor, as MLA, and Minister of the Environment, Minister of Health. I, for the past 2 years, have been working in the cannabis industry, working out of the Ottawa-Gatineau area. And I was persuaded to come back into politics for a number of reasons. I saw firsthand in Ontario the impact of the Ford Conservative government cuts on services to Ontarians. Decreased autism services, reduce funding for public health in the middle of an opioid crisis, increased class sizes that will lead to obviously different learning outcomes, worse learning outcomes, and a lot of teachers that will be laid off as a result of that. And seeing that happen in Ontario made me fear that a Conservative government in Canada would replicate that across the country. That, along with obviously the biggest single challenge that we face, which is climate change, and dealing with the worst public health crisis that we've ever seen in this country in the opioid overdose situation, I realized that I couldn't sit on the sidelines for this election. And so I'm happy to be home here in Kamloops, working full-time on the campaign, and looking forward to meeting as many of you as possible, answering your questions. And we have 3 more weeks to go forward in this campaign, and I know a lot of you are obviously interested, and that's why you're here today. The Liberal Party of Canada, I will argue, is the party that has done more for real climate action with a national price on carbon, which of course we've had here in British Columbia for over a decade. So putting a price on carbon so people make choices about their greenhouse gas footprint is important. But it's also combined with a limit on the oil sands. It's also combined with closing coal-fired plants sooner, and a clean fuel standard, which again, the Conservatives would roll back if they were to be elected. Now, one question is, how does that square with support for the Trans Mountain Pipeline? And I'm a real pragmatist. I think you have to really accomplish the things that you can in a way that doesn't cause shock to the system. A rate of change problem is what got us here in the first place. With the release of CO2 in a very short period of the Earth's history has caused climate change. Going away from fossil fuels too quickly will cause an economic rate of change problem. And my fear is that if we were to try to flip a switch and go to a relatively high carbon footprint that we have today to a low carbon economy, which we need for tomorrow, if we do that too quickly, we will throw a lot of people out of work. And in my experience in politics, when times are tough and people are worried about their jobs, about putting food on their table, they don't think about the environment. It doesn't move up on their list of priorities. And my fear is when people are thrown into economic chaos and they're worried about their jobs, they're worried about their families, they're not going to be thinking about the environment. So we have to transition from a high carbon economy to a low carbon economy. So buying the pipeline to get the best value for that oil today and use the revenues to take us to a low carbon future makes a lot of sense to me. Also, importantly for British Columbians, it's tied to a $1.5 billion ocean protection plan. So the Salish Sea, the Burrard Inlet will be safer with all of those protections put in place than it is today. The other thing that I'm very passionate about is may be aware is the overdose crisis that we are facing here in British Columbia. 10,000 Canadians have died from opioid overdoses in the last 4 years. This is the worst public health crisis that we've ever faced as a country. I know many of you have been touched by this. I know our family has, with friends that have died from overdoses. And this is something that touches so many of us across the country, and there is so much more to do. Here in British Columbia, we have taken very bold steps that have been replicated across the country. But now we see, with Conservative governments being elected in Alberta and in Ontario, an attack on those life-saving initiatives that have been put in place in those provinces. So I'm here and I'm looking forward to the next 3 weeks. I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much for coming out today. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Peter Kerek. I am the candidate for the Communist Party of Canada. It really is a great honor for me to run for the second oldest party in Canada, formed in 1921. From its origins, we were holding the torch and leading the fight for unemployment insurance, pensions, rights in the workplace, labor rights, peace activism. And when we started fighting for things like unemployment insurance in the 20s, you know who was fighting against us? Liberals, Conservatives, all the right-wingers, the fascist parties, some of which some folks feel the People's Party or Anti-People's Party of Canada represents today, the new movement of fascism as it looks in the 21st century. So beyond the 1920s and the 30s, we were fighting to end the slave camps, or the government called them relief camps, but the people living in them were considered them slave camps. We were fighting for the end to that so that we could have some form of social welfare and pensions and basic subsistence living for people rather than having to live in these types of camps, they were called. And then finally, years and years later, Conservatives and Liberals bought into the idea that maybe a social welfare system is a good idea. Otherwise, we're going to have all these communists and socialists taking power. And of course, you know, Liberals and Conservatives were opposed to all those progressive changes. We fought against wars. We fought against the military interventionism, the destruction. You know, best example is in Vietnam, the peace movement against that criminal activity, that criminal behavior led by the United States and imperialism. In Canada, per capita, gained as much out of the Vietnam War as the American military system. We sold raw resources, copper, nickel, everything they needed, munitions, jeeps, everything the Americans needed. We profiteered from that. That's not, well, and Conservatives and Liberals and all their supporters profiteered from that as well. So today when we sit in 2019, the Communist Party and we candidates of the Communist Party are proud to be holding the torch again for the most progressive changes that we feel society should be leading towards. And I heard a historian mention a couple of years ago, people will look at our society today in the future the same way we look back at the slave owners of the 1800s, in the way that we treat our poor and the oppressed and the exploited so terribly. And we know that we can end homelessness, the need for food banks, food insecurity, we can end war, but there's an ideological position against ending all those things. That labor and working people must be made to compete against each other, and they must live in a society where there's constant desperation, threats of homelessness, food insecurity, because when a workforce is threatened with those real factors, they're more likely to work for less money, demand less in the workplace, not organize into unions, and not demand more from their politicians, because every day is just a struggle to get by. Now, I can't let Mr. Lake go on his part in the opioid crisis. As a health minister and as a member of the BC Liberal Party, he should have known the consequences of years and years of funding cuts to social services, substance abuse clinics. I mean, these are things that if you just looked beyond your myopic landscape and looked around the world, what happens when you cut public services, the natural consequence is that people are going to suffer because they fall through the cracks, whether it's inability to get substance abuse treatment or just the general problem of difficulty, the threat of poverty and homelessness. He's in particular the health minister, and in a way I kind of hope Cathy McLeod doesn't lose to Terry Lake, because Terry Lake might do terrible things once he's elected if he were made a cabinet minister. I am truly fearful for what would happen in that case. At least Cathy McLeod is just a quiet backbencher. And I've been given the 5-second signal. Thank you everyone for coming out.
How's everybody enjoying global warming this morning? Ain't it great? 40 years of failed predictions, not one has come true. 40 years of falsified data according to the British Columbia Supreme Court ruling just 2 weeks ago. Ain't it great? I'm Ken Finlayson. I'm your candidate for Canada's the fastest growing political party in the history of Canada, the People's Party of Canada. We might not be politically correct, but we won't fool you. We tell it like it is. Now, one thing I have to address is this gentleman from the Communist Party labeling us as fascists. This guy needs to bone up on his homework a little bit and see what fascism is defined as, which likes to control every aspect of your life. We believe in smaller government and more freedom. In fact, we're about as far removed from fascism as you can get. We have more immigrant candidates than any other party per capita. I shouldn't say half. Anyway, we're not what he says. We're not fascists. We've got 4 guiding principles, kind of a litmus test if you like, that every one of our policies and programs has to pass first. And that's freedom, fairness, responsibility, and respect. We're a party of small government, not bigger government. We believe in the old principle that Thomas Jefferson put forth, that government should only do that which the people cannot otherwise do for themselves. We don't believe that CO2 is a pollutant. We don't believe that carbon dioxide is the cause of climate change. Now, we absolutely believe in climate change, but we believe it's a naturally occurring phenomena that carbon dioxide is not responsible for. That does not mean that we don't believe in pollution. We got lots of it. We need to address it. And I think all people are concerned about the environment, and we're no different in that respect. But we don't say that we don't believe CO2 is the cause of climate change just because we fell off a turnip someplace or we're a bunch of hillbillies. We say that on the basis of some of the most preeminent scientists and climatologists in the world, one of whom is British Columbia's own son, Dr. Patrick Moore. And when I say he's a preeminent, his field of study is ecology, which is the relationship of all these chaotic systems that contribute to climate. It's a lot more complex than just one greenhouse gas called CO2. And the reason CO2 is a greenhouse gas is because plants love it. Plants inhale CO2. Carbon dioxide is to plants what oxygen is to us. It's the world's most perfect symbiotic relationship, and in return, the plants exhale oxygen. Ask any greenhouse operator, and many of them, the majority of them, purchase carbon dioxide to put into the greenhouse to enhance the growth of their plants. It's a plant food. There's no proof that it causes climate change. It's a minor factor. It's 0.04% of the atmosphere. Water vapor is over 90. We have other scientists like Dr. Tim Ball. He's the guy that just won the court case against Michael Manley right here in British Columbia Supreme Court for he alleged that Michael Manley falsified the data of the famous hockey stick graph, and he won, according to the BC Supreme Court. We've got the Secretary General of the World big word for me, Meteorological Society. He has a Finnish name I can't pronounce, so I won't even try that. But anyway, he says the media has gone right off the rails on this climate alarmism. And as I said earlier, we've been waiting 40 years for this global warming to kick in, and it doesn't look like anybody's got it yet here this morning. Sorry, what's that, 5 seconds? All right, so if you want the truth, we're not afraid to tell the truth. We're not politically correct. But if you're tired of the same old, vote for the People's Party.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Cynthia Egli, and I'm running for the NDP party. I have some talking notes here because this is day 6 for me, and I'm still learning. When I first put my name forward to run for the NDP, I had a couple people come up to me and say how brave I was, especially going against some of the people behind me. And they told me they were voting for one of the people behind me. So today when that person got here, I went and said how honored I was, and they basically told me when I'd soon learn that, something like that, I'd soon learn that if I stuck my neck out, I'd get it cut off. So I'm not in this. I'm in this because we need a change. I think that the Liberals and the Conservatives have got us where we are today. And a little bit more about myself. I'm a family mediator, and I'm a union activist, and I absolutely love my jobs. I have put my name down on the ballot because for my kids and for our kids. Our kids and are worried about their future. They're worried about climate change. I was up at the climate walk yesterday, climate justice. In fact, I somehow found myself out at the front with the megaphone. So hopefully that gave me a little bit of practice for today. I believe in the doing things right and doing what's right. And sorry, I need a little hint. I believe in taking care of others and putting people first. And those are the values of the federal NDP party. Those are the values of Jagmeet Singh and the federal NDP party. Going forward, the federal NDP party believes in the recognition, full recognition of the human rights of Indigenous peoples and also full human rights of all peoples. I believe the NDP is the only party that believes that we are all equal. When our loved ones fall ill, we should not be worried about how we're going to pay for medications or how taking our 3-year-old to the doctor and having to wait in line at a walk-in or at the emergency because you don't have a family doctor. In 2015 and 16, I mentioned in my bio that I'm part owner of a business, small business. In 2015 and 16, when my husband and his partner were looking for space to rent, they're the owners of Orchard Walk Pharmacy out in Valley View. When they were looking for space to rent, there was tens of thousands of people in Kamloops that did not have a family doctor. So they found a space to rent that included space to lease to doctors, and there are now doctors out at Orchard Walk. But today, there's still tens of thousands of people in Kamloops that don't have a family doctor. I just feel that's shameful. And at the time that they were building that business, Kamloops had an MLA who was, he just mentioned it, the Minister of Health. But somehow we didn't get a ton more family doctors here, despite having that Minister of Health living in our own city. I did feel compelled to put my name in, and that's one of the reasons. Yes, 5 seconds. So anyways, thank you very much for coming out. 20 years, Kamloops had a NDP MLA from 1980 to 2000. I know those values are here in Kamloops. On October 21st, let's do something different, because if we keep doing what we've always done, we're going to get what we've always gotten. Let's turn Kamloops left side up and send me to Ottawa. Thank you very much.
I'm Iain Currie, the Green Party candidate for Kamloops-Thompson-Cariboo. I was born here. I was raised here. I returned here 20 years ago to raise a family and to work as a Crown prosecutor, which I'd been doing for most of the time in my career here. So I woke up earlier this year at 50 years old, and I looked at the news, and I saw fires and floods and record-breaking heat waves, and I thought about the contrast between the future that I saw for myself growing up here and the future that I anticipate for my kids right now. And it's the contrast between those two things that brings me here today. And I believe that we need to take immediate, decisive action in order to make the future as prosperous and safe for my kids as it was for me growing up here in Kamloops. Now, I'm talking about three ideas in this campaign. The Green Party has a full platform touching on all of the issues that concern Canadians, and the federal government needs to deal with. But I'm talking about three big issues, and the first one is making Canada and making this riding in this area leaders in the transition to a new green, clean economy. So that's getting away from the boom and bust cycle of extracting our resources, shipping them at low cost overseas, and buying back the finished products. That's leading the charge to creating renewable, sustainable, long-term jobs in this area and in this country. So the second idea I'm talking about is at the core of the Green Party message and always has, and that is fighting the climate crisis. So taking those immediate steps, not making incremental small changes that are acceptable to the oil and gas lobby, but in fact making those changes that science tells us are necessary so that we have a future for the next generations. And the third is making change in Ottawa. So changing the way that we do things. And that's a common refrain that I'm hearing from people when I'm knocking on doors and talking on the phone to voters in this area. And I suspect all over the country, and that is that we need to start doing things differently. And the Green Party, for me, is a leader in the renewal of our democracy. And the big thing for me is that we do not whip votes, meaning that all votes for a Green MP are free votes, meaning that when you send me to Ottawa on your behalf, I will be voting on your behalf. I will be taking positions on issues on behalf of the people of Kamloops-Thompson-Cariboo, not according to the dictates of the leader of our party, not according to the dictates of the party itself, but according and with the people of Kamloops-Thompson-Cariboo. So those are the three things I'm talking about. I'm really looking forward to hearing what issues that you have and the questions that you have. Just as when I knock on the door, I'm hearing issues all over the map in terms of what people most care about. But a common refrain are the three things that I'm talking about, and that is leading in this area and in this country in the transition to a new, clean, green economy. Leading the charge, immediate, decisive action on the climate crisis, and also doing things differently, making change in Ottawa. So I'm Iain Currie. On October 21st, I hope that you'll vote with your values. Vote green.
I don't know about anybody else out here, but I am violently shivering right now. My name is Cheeseborough, and I'm running with the Animal Protection Party of Canada. Some of you may be looking up here and wondering, she's so young. Why is she running in a federal election to be a member of parliament? I'm running because I have passion. I'm driven. I have lived experience of homelessness, poverty, sexualized violence. I know what it's like to be let down by a system. As someone who is passionate to fight for other people and who has experience fighting, working with policymakers to advocate for what needs to change in certain systems, I will make sure that every single one of you has a strong voice and a strong representation about what matters for you and your family in this community. I am also really passionate about animals, and I think the party name gives that away. But what I've seen in my lived experience and working alongside with people is that a lot of the injustices that are occurring to human populations are also occurring to animals. We have a very distinct parallel running with systems of oppression in our society. That being said, climate change is a huge issue, and the world's leading scientists are getting together and they have proof, they have facts that this is happening. And young people such as myself are mobilizing across the world to stand up and fight for their future. Now, I really applaud all of my fellow candidates who are advocating for climate change. But I'm standing here as a young person, advocating and being that direct voice of the youth who in 30 years are going to be the leaders of this country and of the world. We're the ones that are going to see the economy fall apart if we don't change. And when I say we're going to address climate change, that's a lens to look at all issues with, not as an isolated issue that just banning single-use harmful plastics is going to solve. When we look at our economy, we are extracting resources at a rate that our country and the planet can't regenerate to make up for. We need to look at no longer economic growth, but economic stability, sustainability, inclusion, and equity for everybody. We need to be looking at our education systems. We need to be looking at how we can bring green initiatives, teaching young kids how to be able to cook their own food, grow their own food, and make healthy food choices going forwards. We need to look at our food system specifically. We need to look at all of the industries that are highly contributing to climate change through greenhouse gas emissions, deforestation, ocean dead zones, species extinction, habitat destruction, topsoil erosion. And obviously coal and oil are huge industries in that. And if I was elected, I would be getting rid of those subsidies that are going in right away because we need to be transitioning to green alternatives. In fact, wind energy is cheaper now than coal. Why aren't we utilizing it? We can be going forwards into a future that is going to be better for everybody. But we're also willing to address another industry that no other party here is, and that is animal agriculture. If we're talking about CO2, yes, plants do absorb CO2, but we need those plants to actually be there to absorb CO2 too. Look at the Brazilian Amazon rainforest right now. Up to 91% of it has been deforested to make way for cattle farming and feed crops that are being imported to countries like Canada. Those are the lungs of the earth, and they are burning right now because of illegal clearing. But it's not just the Amazon rainforest. We can look at our own forests in Canada. Our industries aren't replanting, and now they're actually deforesting old growths. How is any of this sustainable? So I want to summarize in that a vote for the Animal Protection Party is a vote for holding every single harmful industry accountable for what they are doing and supporting those families who are dependent and have their livelihoods dependent on those industries to transition into a better future for everyone, and that young people are going to feel empowered in that they have a future to look forwards to. Thank you everybody for being here today.
So now we're going to go through some questions. We have questions drawn from farmers market customers and vendors. So each question, I'll assign one question to each candidate, and you'll have 1 minute to respond. If another candidate has a really pressing desire to answer and to talk about that question, they'll also be given 1 minute. So that we accepted a group of these written questions, and we had to edit them down for redundancy. Some of them, there was some overlap. So we're going to start with Kira and work our way back this way. So we'll start with the top. What is your plan for meeting the climate change objective? So 1 minute.
So as I had just introduced, we need to be looking at these industries that are contributing high amounts on a global scale. We do have to look locally in Canada and our region, for sure, most definitely. But so many countries see us and look up to us and want to follow our example, the examples that we're leading. So by removing the subsidies that are going to coal and oil industries and redirecting them to support the families and the workers to retrain into green energy alternatives, it's going to help support them. If we're looking at animal agriculture, we need to be phasing out of that altogether. Animal agriculture and the consumption of animal products is really unhealthy for us. Even Canada's new health food guide has been revised to effectively remove dairy from it and to say prioritize plant-based alternatives to animal foods. And we also need to be looking at how we can make the forestry industry more sustainable and allowing the workers to be able to transition to higher quality jobs and stopping the exports of raw resources as well. Thank you.
As I said earlier, so a key part of the Green Party platform is with respect to combating the climate crisis. And in 1 minute, I don't have time to explore all 20 points of our Mission Possible plan. But the one that I'm most excited about, and I think makes our plan head and shoulders above any other party plan, is that it begins with bringing people together. It begins with a plan to, across governments, not just the federal government, but bringing together provincial governments, Indigenous governments, municipalities, on an all-hands-on-deck plan to concentrate our collective efforts on combating a crisis, a real emergency that we have. And so it begins with bringing people across party lines together.
Hi, the NDP has a plan of 300,000 jobs in retrofitting housing and global green energy. And also, I just want to point out on that note, climate justice was the name really of the walk yesterday up at TRU. And climate justice is actually making the environmental issues political and ethical issues, which they are, rather than just something that does or doesn't exist. Thank you.
Well, as I said, we believe in climate change, and the question kind of presupposes that we're going to do something about it, but we don't think we have that capacity. Before I go any farther, though, I have to compliment a young lady with the Animal Rights Party on her beautiful leather boots. Anyway, we think that climate change is a naturally occurring phenomenon. And Maxime Bernier, our leader, when asked that very same question, what are you going to do about climate change? His response was a single word: nothing. That doesn't mean we're not going to do something about pollution, which we have a lot of. 7.5 billion liters of toxic sewage and chemicals going into the Fraser Delta every day. That needs to be addressed. Not some hypothetical potential disaster that may or may not occur at some unknown date in the future. We need a reality check. That's what we're here for.
So the Communist Party, and personally, I think the Greens and the NDP do have a fairly good position on addressing the environment. Our platform looks at a lot of the same solutions. However, the big difference is they want to keep doing it under the capitalist system, and we see that as a clear failure in understanding the power relations between the oil industry and even agribusiness, and the power and influence that they hold in Ottawa. And in the capitalist system, that political power will revert and turn back the clock as soon as your progressive party gets elected. The capitalist system itself and all the power structures and all the cozy relationships between the media, industry, and the Prime Minister's office need to be absolved, so that we have democratic control over our resources and our industry and take it out of the hands of the capitalist billionaire oligarchs at the top of the system.
Thanks, and I better get my word in here because I don't want to be the only one not talking about climate change. Listen, folks, I, as former environment minister, as someone who, as your mayor, really promoted environmental policies, I truly believe all of us have to do our part to reduce our greenhouse gas footprint. I've lived downtown for 12 years in a townhouse, Lisa and I, and I've driven an electric car for 7 years. That's my personal, contribution, because I think each one of us needs to do our part. The Conservatives will tell you that Canada only produces 2% of global greenhouse gas emissions, but we are still among the top 10 in the world, and on a per-person basis, we are number in the top 3. So all of us need to do our part, and we may disagree with the Green Party and the NDP Party in terms of how we get there, but I'm happy to see so many people today putting this as their number one concern for this federal election. Thank you.
This is a question for Iain Currie. It's a specific policy question. Do you have plans for a federal recycling program?
I think the short answer is no. I don't think there's a specific party platform in terms of federal recycling program. But better than that, I think, because recycling is generally a municipal issue, is we are talking about doubling what is now called the gas tax. And I forget what we're rebranding it, because it has nothing to do with tax on gas, which is given to municipalities each year. So essentially increasing the funding to municipalities to allow them to actually increase the things like municipal recycling programs. And also proposing and again, I'm going to forget the jargon that we're using in the platform, but also $1 billion to municipalities for I think it's community environment core. So allowing $1 billion to municipalities to hire young people in order to advance programs like recycling or locally composting and things like that.
this is for the NDP candidate, Cynthia. What are the key features that would make universal basic income successful? What are the key features that would make universal basic income successful? Would you like to answer that?
So this is day 6 for me. I'm not sure I've heard this actual term before, universal basic income. I can speak about universal health care, which I truly believe has been around forever. Tommy Douglas was the father of universal health care. I truly believe, and that's the reason why I'm standing here in front of you today, that everyone has a right to afford their medications and their drugs that they need. It's a human right. And your job should not dictate what kind of medication, whether you can get the best medications for yourself or not. So that's my answer, that I believe that universal health care is a right.
So our party supports a universal basic income. Anything that uplifts people so that they can get out of the threats of homelessness, poverty, food insecurity. We definitely support that. We don't see that as a real solution to the power dynamics and the injustices in society, but it is a way, and it can be easily funded. That's not an issue, really. It is a way to lift people up and even allow them just to become more politically engaged and engaged in their communities, because they're not starving themselves between 2 part-time jobs or 3 part-time jobs, working 60, 70 hours a week and not even be able to make a living. A universal basic income gives people the right to go purchase their own food and not have to rely on handouts from civil society organizations in the community, and gives them the dignity to be self-sufficient and get all their needs met. Thanks.
And that's so just to say, the Green Party also has a plan for a universal livable wage for all Canadians. And the idea is, as Peter has said, is to essentially eliminate poverty, which is I think a laudable goal for all of the parties, and is doable in a Canadian context by providing a universal income for all Canadians without the complicated bureaucracy that's presently in place, patchwork systems for trying to alleviate poverty, which have not been successful throughout the history of Canada. So it's a good idea whose time has come. And the Green Party wants to lead the charge.
Okay, so we have a great question for the People's Party candidate. Do you have any plans to increase CPP to low-income single women?
Sounds like a good idea. Actually, we wish everything was free. But the first thing we need to do is figure out how we're going to pay for it. But to be honest with you, we don't have a plan specifically targeting low-income single women. I'm saying it's something we certainly should address, but I'm not going to blow any smoke here. We do not have a plan, but that does not mean we won't have a plan. We're a compassionate party, and but we have to find the money. But one of the ways that we can find the money for programs like that is we believe in putting Canadians first, including single women. And that means we don't think we need to be building roads in Africa, pipelines in China when we can't even get a pipeline here, when we have people sleeping on the streets of Kamloops. So to answer your question indirectly, yes, I think that's a good idea.
The Communist Party candidate, what issue under federal jurisdiction will be your priority or focus for the riding of the Kamloops-Thompson-Cariboo?
Well, in a nutshell, if we had a massive revamping of our taxation system so that we eliminate the capacity of the billionaires at the top of the capitalist pyramid to keep accumulating all their profits and all the wealth that are taken out of our communities. Instead, we redistribute that wealth more equitably across the country to ensure the end of homelessness, the end of food insecurity, the end of unemployment and underemployment, an increase in the minimum wage. I mean, these are all things that would help Kamloops, and especially in our current taxation system, it's easy to take resources out of a community like ours, and for the one percenters, the billionaires at the top, they spend it on items that are not produced in Kamloops: luxury cars, luxury properties, luxury vacations. That's all money that flows out of our local communities. You keep that money in the hands of people here, especially the lowest income people. That's money that's spent in our local economy, and it's better for everyone here.
So this is a question for Terry Lake. Do you support the Ajax Mine project, or would you oppose it? The claim appears to be put forward again for development.
Thank you very much. You know, the issue of Ajax Mine is one that has caused quite a lot of division in our community, which is, while the discussion was robust, it really tore the community apart. We saw, you know, families disagreeing on Ajax Mine. It went through a process, and that's the position I always took as Environment Minister and as MLA. There was a process there. The process was carried out. It was a very thorough process, took a very long time, and it was turned down. So unless they have moved that mine 10 kilometers out of town, or unless now it is an underground type of mine like New Gold, I would not be in favor of bringing back the same proposal for an open pit mine in just outside of Kamloops. We went through the process. It was a good process. The decision was made. I think we really should put that issue to bed for the city of Kamloops.
I have to speak on this because in 2017, during the provincial election here, the only party that had an official position against the Ajax Mine was the Communist Party of British Columbia. Now, some folks were mistaken when they thought the Greens were opposed, and environmentalists and the anti-Ajaxers came to me as well, concerned about this, because their local candidates were allowed to stand against Ajax, but their party would not take a stand against Ajax. They had a 79-page platform piece, and not once did the Green Party say, we are opposed to Ajax. In fact, the word Ajax does not appear in that 79-page document. For a party that is supposed to be representing environmental issues, it was a real betrayal of those environmental principles to not take a stand against Ajax, and it actually revealed that the concerns of the business community are going to come before the concerns of the environment. We continue to be totally opposed to that mine, which would be terrible for everybody's health in this community, among other things, on top of walking all over Indigenous rights.
Thanks. So I said earlier that the Green Party doesn't whip its votes. I also said that there is a full platform. It's 88 pages this time in the federal sphere, and it also doesn't mention Ajax. But your MP would be free to vote with the people of Kamloops-Thompson-Cariboo, and your MP and the Green Party itself has always stood for, that's why Green is in the name, for concerns with protecting our natural environment. So you can count on your Green MP voting against the Ajax Mine. So the question is, do we oppose Ajax Mine? The simple answer is yes, your MP opposes the Ajax Mine.
In the Kamloops region, when it comes to, quote, low-hanging fruit, unquote, what has to happen to mitigate against and adapt to climate change? So it's about low-hanging fruit.
Okay, I think this is a little up for interpretation. Immediately ending those subsidies, as I talked about, looking at transitioning to green alternatives, looking to transition to plant-based farming alternatives. That's going to use less land and less water, working with Indigenous communities to be able to self-govern, to get their land sovereignty back. Adapting is very important as well because there is damage that is irreversible. Our oceans, for example, are poisoned right now. So we do need to look at how we can adapt with that. I wish I knew what the low-hanging fruit meant. Okay. So yeah, so the really, really easy things, obviously, is to ban like grocery bags, bringing reusable bags, going to the grocery stores, and also having people bring in reusable containers. We should be also implementing, this is kind of leading from a previous question, with recycling programs, but also composting. Composting would be really beneficial for us to reduce what's going in the landfills. I hope I answered that question a little bit.
I won't take your time because the one obvious low-hanging fruit, ban fracking.
We're working our way back down this line, so Iain, you're next again, the way this order of this. What are your plans for low-income housing?
So the Greens are proposing to bring the federal government back into the affordable housing space. So in the 70s and 80s, the federal government was involved, and throw out a number here, but in Vancouver, where of course they're going through a real housing crisis, still to this day, more than 70% of the, sorry, I should correct that, I believe that's more than 30% of the rental housing units in Vancouver at present were built in the 70s and 80s when the federal government was involved. So what we're proposing is to bring back two ideas, one of which is through CMHC, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, to support with low interest loans the co-op sector. And the second is tax incentives for purpose-built rental housing.
It's pretty warm for November, hey? The NDP has a plan to bring 500,000 units of affordable housing all across Canada, half of those within the first 5 years.
Thanks. And I just wanted to, Iain said that you want to bring the federal government back into housing. Federal government is in housing and partners with the provincial government to put money into low-income housing across the country. The Liberal plan is to infuse more money into low-cost housing for Canadians, and of course have increased the ability for new home buyers to qualify through CMHC. We disagree with the conservative approach to get rid of the stress test. What that will do is it will, in fact, put people in situations that they will not be able to afford, and will drive up the price of housing by estimates of up to 6%. So we have to be really careful when we're talking about the stress test that has in fact brought down the price of housing for people. Getting rid of that stress test, as the Conservatives have outlined, will in fact cause more affordable issues for young Canadians seeking to own their first home. Thank you.
Communist Party of Canada supports the purchasing, construction, and operation of public housing, affordable housing units and complexes across the country wherever there is homelessness identified, and also in communities where price gouging is identified. Because currently we have price gouging landlords who compete with other price gouging landlords. Well, in a market system, that only means there's going to be price gouging options. With the introduction of affordable housing, government operated, it's never going to disappear. The government's not going to dissolve and your housing is gone. It's not going to be gentrified. That housing not only eliminates homelessness, housing insecurity, but it also mitigates the market pressure to keep raising rents. Because instead of having price gouging landlords only competing with each other, you now have an affordable public housing unit there to help keep those prices from soaring out of reach. Thanks.
echoing some sentiments. We need to prioritize low-income housing for elderly, for students, for single parents, for people who are also on fixed incomes. We also need to be developing a plan to address gentrification, because that is displacing a lot of low-income individuals across Canada. We also have issues of vacancy and capital investors purchasing homes and holding them as an investment, waiting to turn over to make a profit. We need to be able to regulate that and control that, because right now, we can look in Vancouver, for example, there's more vacant housing options in Vancouver than there are homeless people. They could all be housed, but the way that the system is working for the benefit and the profit of those with already having money, it's putting those who are struggling even more further down.
All right, I liked Iain Currie's answer. Statistics don't lie. In the 70s and 80s, when the government was involved in affordable housing initiatives, there were more affordable housing units built. We're in for that. That's reality. That's not virtue signaling. That's a flat fact. And we're all for reality checks. Now, there's one area another area I have in common with Iain. Contrary to what he said, that the Green Party is the only party that doesn't have whipped votes, the People's Party does not have whipped votes. We believe in free speech, and that applies to Parliament, our candidates, and every one of you.
For half of it, because the poor person who had started, her voice was starting to crack. So, I mean, look, I'm up here for almost really one of those reasons. Again, my kids are worried. Our children are worried about the future. I think we are in this position because of the Conservatives and the Liberals and the last years of governing. I am against some very well-versed candidates, but they don't have the same values as the NDP, and I think the NDP is fully going to support youth, responding to youth who protest climate crisis. Thank you.
Strikes and protests on climate change. And I was really happy to see that there were more candidates this time for the climate strike at TRU than there was the Friday before that when the high school students were organizing it. But I do want to throw out there that as politicians, we need to remember to make space for those who are taking the leadership and organizing these. Specifically, the young people and the students, they should be the ones leading the march, leading the chants, because it's their voices they're fighting to have heard. So I think that's something that we do need to remember. And this goes beyond just youth movements. Looking at Indigenous communities, we need to be making space for everybody. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
How is the proposed Trans Mountain expansion consistent with meeting the UN goal? That's the question.
Well, first of all, a pipeline is the safest way known to man to ship oil. As far as being consistent with the UN goal, we have a rather low opinion of the United Nations. What else can you have with a corrupt, unelected body that has countries like Syria, Saudi Arabia, and the Sudan chairing the Human Rights Committee? How big a joke is that? Max Bernier, our leader, calls the UN a joke. And that's a pretty good word for it. So as far as how do we address the UN goal of holding the temperature of 1.5 degrees or whatever, we think you can't do it. It's a naturally occurring phenomena. That presupposes that CO2 is the cause of it. We think CO2 is not the cause of it. It's a non-issue. The UN is irrelevant.
So the world's leading scientists say that we need to, that temperature is rising regardless based on what we've already done, and we need to, as a matter of some urgency, maintain a temperature rise of less than 2 degrees. Canada right now, with the policies we currently have, are on the trajectory to contribute to the problem to the extent of 4 or 5 degrees of warming. And so we are in a crisis situation. And in the first rule of getting out of a hole is to stop digging. And the Trans Mountain Pipeline is digging in a big way. And so that's so we need to, the two things are completely inconsistent. It is intended and will have the inevitable effect, building twinning the Trans Mountain Pipeline, of increasing the production in the oil sands and increasing the problem, digging the hole even deeper.
Thanks, and I'm going to disagree respectfully with Iain. I understand the passion, I understand the goal, and I think we both agree on the goal, but it's how we get there. The Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, combined with a limit on oil sands emissions, a national price on carbon, a $1.5 billion ocean protection plan, is the best way, especially when you're taking those profits, to transition to a low carbon economy. We can't get there in one step. If we do, we'll cause economic shock that will reduce the concern about the environment down below putting food on your table. And, you know, I wish we could all get there faster. I really do. But we have to be realistic. We have to be pragmatic, and we have to have a comprehensive plan to go from a high carbon economy to a low carbon economy. This pipeline is part of that. If it was just a pipeline without all of those other initiatives to get to a low carbon economy, I would not support it. But it will create thousands of jobs here in the Thompson Valleys, and it will help get us to a low carbon economy.
So the fallacy promoted by the Liberal Party about needing to make pipelines and export oil to sponsor renewable energy industry is sheer propaganda, to use that twist. To say that we don't have wealth in this country to sponsor and fund a change in our industry is ridiculous. You don't need to keep pumping out oil to get the resources in order to change our industries. The money is there. You could even just think of this, tax the super rich and take that money and put it into renewable resource industries. This propagandizing of the benefits of oil extraction is a real strong indicator of the cozy relationship between the oil industry and Mr. Trudeau and all the right-wing parties in Ottawa.
I'm just going to have a final word on this, since I think I'm the last to go. 2015, 16, 17, and 18 were the hottest in BC. And likely Canada. If we don't do something different and have the courage to do something different, then the smoldering fires of the 17 and 18 summers will become the new reality. And our children will live through some of the worst natural disasters ever. We have to have the courage to do something different, and I gotta tell you, I've done a lot of courageous things in the last week, including getting up and being out at the front of that climate strike yesterday at TRU. Thank you.
This is for the Communist Party candidate. Given the complete failure of the, quote, war on drugs, unquote, and the opioid crisis and the success of the Portugal model, will your party decriminalize all drugs?
It's like a super softball question. Of course, Of course we'd decriminalize. I mean, the criminalization of all these drugs, as Gabor Mate rightly points out, totally arbitrarily chosen. What we decided to make illegal and legal. More people die from alcohol poisoning and long substance abuse than of many other substances, including heroin even, according to Gabor Mate, one of the leaders in substance abuse issues in Canada and internationally. We definitely believe the Portugal model works. It clearly works. The evidence is there that it works, the decriminalization. That allows people to also seek help because they're not going to be criminalized by the process. So, and drug addiction and substance abuse is actually decreased in Portugal. Like, it's the model. It's the perfect model. I don't really need to go on. Thanks.
I'm rushing to agreement with my communist friend. The war on drugs has never worked. We've seen our friends, our families, members die from the failed war on drugs. Now, the Liberal Party does not have an official policy of decriminalization. It doesn't. But I'm here to tell you that if I'm elected, I am going to work very hard to have our government look at the Portugal model, because it's treated as a health issue in Portugal, not a criminal issue. And people are put into contact with treatment instead of going to jail. We have to take a different approach to the way we deal with drug issues in this country. As Peter said, more people die from alcohol-related disease than any other drugs. And yet, we treat people who have problematic substance use as lesser beings somehow. And we've seen Mr. Scheer say that he will not approve safe consumption sites, meaning that some lives are valuable and others just aren't. We have to take a different approach, and I'm going to work hard in Ottawa to do that. Thank you.
Thanks. So the Green Party, I am proud to say, does in fact have a policy to decriminalize drugs. And while I will certainly vote for that as a Crown prosecutor for 18 years, I saw firsthand the destruction that the war on drugs causes, and how it distracts from the investigation and prosecution of violence and crimes of exploitation and other things like that. But I believe I read in the media just recently the Prime Minister denying that the Liberal Party was going to decriminalize drugs, and unlike the Green Party, and I apologize, the People's Party, although Ken is gone, the Green Party again does not whip votes, and so I would not be required to vote for decriminalization, but certainly would. I would note that the overdose crisis, as it's sometimes called, is in fact mostly a poisoning crisis, and so that to address that. And to address organized crime, we need to decriminalize. That's low-hanging fruit.
Hello again. I'm not actually sure what the NDP's, that's something I am going to have to ask and learn, but I do know that I live with someone that absolutely believes in the decriminalization of drugs. But I just want to say I think it's super sad that we're up here talking about these things, and the reality, bringing it back to our communities, is that we've got loved ones that go out at night or go out to a party and they don't return. And years ago when I was a kid, it was drinking and driving. And I absolutely lost a sister at 18 years old to a drinking driver. And again, as a parent, parents in Kamloops are worrying about their kids not coming home. So it needs to be addressed, full stop. And thank you for whoever asked that question.
Again, I fully support the decriminalization of drugs. When we're looking at models that assess why people are using drugs, Gabor Mate, as you mentioned was before, has a really good understanding. He's worked in the Lower East Side, Vancouver, for years, decades, and he's seen people who are using drugs are using it because they have trauma and a lack of connection. Criminalizing that behavior is further isolating people from being able to form meaningful connections in their lives and to be able to establish a sense of purpose. So we 100% should be moving towards a Portugal model.
Doctor shortage. One problem is the enormous debt load that medical students incur. They must travel across the country for interviews to universities, practical placements in rural communities, etc. Then, once finally finished school, their internship, they must open a business. Perhaps subsidizing education for medical students could be part of the answer. So this is about education and supporting doctors.
First of all, education is expensive, and the Liberal Party has increased the Canada student grants and reduced loans for university students taking out Canada student loans. But to say that we should be subsidizing physician education, I mean, we do. Taxpayers pay a lot of money to subsidize the public secondary school system, which of course is a great investment for our society. The doctor shortage is very complex. We need to fund more residencies in Canada for people that are trained overseas and that can come here, whether they're Canadian or foreign born and foreign trained graduates. And so the Liberal government has committed to work with all provinces and territories on the problem of doctor shortages. I'd worked at it for 4 years. It's extremely complex. I can tell you, you can't produce doctors overnight, but you can change the primary care system to bring more nurse practitioners in the fold, as we have here in Kamloops, and provide those residencies so we can get more physicians in Canada, and we're going to work hard towards that. Thank you.
Our party supports the abolition of all post-secondary education tuition. Post-secondary education should be free, and debts should be forgiven. We should not have students coming out of school. We shouldn't have people going into university thinking, I'd love to be a doctor, but it's going to cost 120 grand to go through school. I think I'm going to do plumbing instead because that might only cost me 20 grand. And we may miss the opportunity, and there's all sorts of missed opportunities through our education system and the financial debt burden that comes out of it. All sorts of lost potential, human potential, when we turn it into this debt factor and people have to start weighing out, am I willing to sacrifice 10 years extra of my life just to pay that debt off? Am I willing to sacrifice having kids or families or a spouse because of all the extra time I'm going to have to put into paying that debt off? Let's eliminate that obstacle and make education, especially for doctors, free.
Did you know that interest on student loans is 3% plus prime? I think that's crazy when I found that out. And the reason that students, some of you might have thought, because I sure thought that, I could get that better rate through my bank. But students can't go to their bank because they don't have any credit. So the NDP Party of Canada believes that all student loans should be at 0%. Thank you.
So I'm proud that the Green Party supports the abolition of tuition. And I'm proud that our plan is to cancel all the federal component of student debt for those students in the system now. So that's a very simple and fully costed platform issue for the Green Party, and I think that's all I need to say.
Likewise, the Animal Protection Party is looking to remove post-secondary tuition and to also forgive student loan debts. Going to school right now is a privilege, and it shouldn't be. Having an education affords society a decent quality of life. We should all be allowed to have that. You know, with myself personally, I wouldn't have been able to return to my post-secondary studies if I wasn't privileged to be in a housing program transcending homelessness. Not everyone has that opportunity. So 100%, this should be much more accessible for people to be able to have decent quality life and overall increase happiness in Canada.
Okay, so that's the question round. We're now going to just wind up. We'll have 3 minutes each. Each candidate can then wind up with 3 minutes. And we'll start here with Terry Lake.
Thank you. Well, I won't take 3 minutes, folks, because we all need to get warm. But what I want to say is, first of all, thank you for coming out. You know, your commitment to finding out about issues and meeting all of the candidates is truly appreciated on a cool morning like today. This election campaign is very important for Canada. We can choose to go backwards with the Conservative government, or we can continue to move forward with the Liberal Party of Canada. Canada has the lowest unemployment rate we've had in 40 years. 900,000 people have been lifted out of poverty with the Canada Child Benefit, including 300,000 children. We have a debt to GDP ratio that is the lowest in the G7. We have a AAA credit rating from all three major credit rating agencies. Again, the only one in the G7. Canada is on the right track. We need to continue to choose forward and vote Terry Lake for the Liberal Party of Canada. Thank you.
I'm not sure what the right track is when you've had Conservatives and Liberals in government for pretty much our entire history, actually our entire Canadian history, and we still have food banks, homelessness, unneeded wars, $24 billion Trudeau's government has committed, is spending currently on military spending. They propose to increase it to $32 billion, and if they meet Mr. Trump's demands like they did with NAFTA, it'll be $70 billion to meet the NATO demands of Mr. Trump. So I don't know what the right track is. In fact, I would argue if we keep going down this track, we only have increased levels of poverty, homelessness, food insecurity. It's time to abandon the inhumane practices best exhibited by the capitalist parties of the Conservatives, the Liberals, the People's Party, even the NDP and Greens. As much as I agree with them on stuff, they don't want to dismantle capitalism. And the problem when you have progressive parties that get into office every once in a while is they lose elections too. And then the retrograde parties that take their place turn back the clock on all the progress that was made. Brothers, sisters, friends, comrades, if you want a more humane society, you can't keep going down this track. And I take issue with the People's Party and the Greens for saying that they won't be whipped into a position by their party, because that kind of means that their platform is irrelevant. If you can't count on your MP following your party's positions that they have outlined as their positions during an election, because they can just vote whichever way they want, then what is the point in having that platform piece? And again, the best example was they wouldn't take a position on Ajax in 2017. And when my opponent in that election was Dan Hines from the North, on the North Thompson. And I said, how can you not take a position? Isn't environmentalism an international movement? Right? Like, we stand up talking about Brazil, right? We talk about these issues. And the response was, well, that's a local issue up to the MP, or MLA in that case, to determine if it's something he's going to take a position on. So what that means is if the Greens get elected, but they don't have an MP in your riding, then your issue is not going to be represented. That's the problem with not adhering to your party's platform or policies. Thanks everyone for coming out. I'd like to thank Igor from peoplesvoice.ca. It turns out that CFJC will not be providing a live broadcast of any of the candidate forums, so it's important that you go and find out your own information. This event will be posted on peoplesvoice.ca probably in about a week's time. Thank you.
I feel like I've been sitting on a chair up at Sun Peaks. I'm so cold, and there's no warming hut to get into when I get out. So I can't really think straight anymore right now. I just want to add that www.ndp.ca has a full outline of the platform for the NDP party. I'm here before you because their values are my values, and the platform, the New Deal for BC and Canada that Jagmeet Singh, who I really admire, he really is cut from the same cloth as Jack Layton, is affordability, taking better care of each other, conserving the environment, taking a good look at the economy so it works for everyone. And that's all I can remember right now. Honestly, as a dear friend of mine said to me, just don't make stuff up. So thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for your questions and your interest. So this is an important election for us here. This is an important election for us all over the country. And this is an election where you get to choose who represents your interest in Ottawa. And we heard today about some of the things that we in Kamloops-Thompson-Cariboo value. Some of the things like decriminalizing drugs so that we can deal effectively with the poisoning crisis we have. We heard about opposition to projects like the Ajax mine, which was led by the people of Kamloops. We learned about the climate crisis, right? We learned about how our future generations require us to act now, as opposed to take incremental small steps, because it's convenient and expedient in this political system that we have that is mostly involves attention being paid to the two parties that have been in power since Confederation. We have an option now to vote for what you want to happen in Ottawa, to vote with your values this time. Not to vote out of fear, not to vote for a future improvements that will happen incrementally and too slow to actually address what the scientists say we need to do. So this time, I urge you to vote for what you want, as opposed to voting against somebody or voting out of fear or voting because there's an empty seat behind us. But instead, to vote your values, vote for what you want. This time, vote green.
So again, thank you everybody for being here, and thank you my fellow candidates for all of your responses and having some really thoughtful conversations here today. I want to say this is my first debate, so I hope you can sense that I'm very passionate about what I'm trying to bring forward and the message that I'm carrying for everybody. And I might not have all the answers for everything right now, but nobody here does. And that's something that we do need to take in consideration. We have ideas and we have plans, but we don't know if these are actually going to be solid solutions until they're implemented. So we need to be looking at who has those best options, who's willing to address and critically analyze every single component when it comes to climate change. Who's responsible and how to hold them accountable and how to move forwards. Like Iain said, as quickly as we can, because incremental change is not going to do it. And the youth and the young people are standing here, and as a young person, I am standing here asking for your vote and to use your conscience and what's best for the future and what's best for your children and your future grandchildren and for the animals and the environment, for everyone we share this planet with. We all have a right and deserve to live on this planet in a future that is going to be best for everybody. Thank you again.
Well, thank you everyone for your time, and I guess the important message for everyone is to get out and vote and to actively engage with this election.